Imagine stepping into a Viking Longhouse on a cold northern night. The walls of timber and turf seem to hold the warmth of the fire, but they also trap the smoke, the smells, and the noise of dozens of people living side by side. The air is thick, the benches crowded, and the crackle of flames mingles with the murmur of voices and the restless shifting of animals kept inside for warmth. To modern eyes, it might seem cozy at first glance, a rustic retreat from the bitter wind. But stay longer, and the reality sets in. The heat is uneven, the smoke stings your eyes, and the privacy you're used to simply doesn't exist. This is no quiet lodge for one. It is the heart of Viking family life, where survival and community mattered far more than comfort. In this story, we'll walk together through a single day inside a Viking longhouse. From the early morning bustle to the late-night feasts, you'll see why life here was demanding, noisy, and exhausting, and why you, with your modern habits and expectations, probably wouldn't last even a day. This channel, History for Sleep, is made to guide you gently through history in a calm and soothing way, even when the details are a little rough around the edges. If you enjoy drifting off to the past with us, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep creating these long, restful journeys through history. And before you get too comfortable, I'd like to hear from you. What parts of history interest you the most? And also, when do you listen in? As you're lying in bed, during the night, or perhaps on a quiet afternoon nap? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. So settle in, relax your body, and let's step inside the smoky, crowded, and unforgettable world of the Viking Longhouse. The Viking Longhouse does not wake with the sudden burst of alarm clocks or the sharp trill of phones. Its awakening is slower, heavier, and filled with sounds and scents that are entirely foreign to modern life. Imagine yourself lying on a broad wooden bench, its surface softened only by animal furs. Around you, the air is thick, damp, and still heavy with the remnants of yesterday's smoke. Your eyes sting slightly as you shift beneath the covers, because the hearth at the center of the room never truly goes out. Even through the night, embers are tended carefully, coaxed to life again each morning to start another day. Smoke clings low, wandering in faint trails that never quite escape through the hole in the roof. The first thing you hear is not silence, but the stir of many lives crowded together. Someone coughs a harsh, rattling cough near the far end of the hall. Children murmur in half-dreams, their small voices muffled beneath blankets. An animal shifts, a goat, perhaps, its hooves scraping softly against the packed earth floor. Then, gradually, comes the sound of breathing all around you, people rising from the depths of sleep, not all at once, but in slow waves, like the sea moving against the shore. Morning in the longhouse is not gentle. The space is dark, lit only by faint gray light slipping through cracks in the timber walls. Your nose fills with the scent of smoke, damp wool, unwashed bodies, and the animals that share the hall with you. The longhouse is not a home of privacy. It is a single sprawling chamber that holds everyone and everything together. From grandparents to infants, from warriors to servants, from cattle to chickens. The first figures to rise are often women, pulling shawls close against the chill as they move quietly toward the fire. Their tasks begin before the rest of the household is fully awake. They bend low over the embers, blowing softly until sparks leap into flame again, filling the room with flickering light and the renewed warmth of fire. Iron pots clink faintly as they are set into place, preparing to hold porridge or broth. The smells of the hearth soon begin to change, shifting from last night's smoke to the earthy, reassuring aroma of boiling grains. For those lying still on the benches, the fire is a signal. It means another day must begin. A man stirs beside you, pulling on his woolen tunic, muttering softly under his breath about the cold. His breath fogs in the dimness as he moves, because even though the hearth is warming, the air beyond its circle is still biting and raw. He reaches for his boots, stiff from damp, and pushes them onto his feet with practiced weariness. The benches creak as more bodies shift and rise. There is no solitude here, no chance to stretch luxuriously or linger in bed. Privacy is an idea unknown to this hall. Every movement is witnessed by others. Every whisper carries. Children climb from their beds with tousled hair, rubbing eyes against the sting of smoke. The oldest among them are already reaching for buckets, ready to fetch water from the well outside, though the morning frost will bite their fingers. You might imagine yourself longing to step outside for air, but the Longhouse does not grant such freedom easily. The doorway is narrow, often covered with a heavy hanging of wool or hide to keep the wind out. Until the first adults leave to see to animals or water, most remain inside, trapped in the haze. The animals that stayed indoors through the night add their own sounds to the morning chorus, the lowing of a cow, the restless shuffle of hooves, the occasional sharp cry of a chicken. Their presence is practical, but it fills the hall with smells most modern noses would struggle to bear. Still, for those who lived here, this was home. The Longhouse's warmth was precious, the fire's glow a comfort, and though the air might be heavy, it was safer than the biting cold of the northern wind outside. Now the room begins to grow louder. The first commands are spoken in firm voices, mothers directing children, men discussing the day's tasks, elders offering slow, deliberate words of advice. The Viking day was measured not by clocks, but by the needs of survival. Animals must be tended, fires must be kept alive, and food must be prepared. Already, the Longhouse hums with activity, even while the sun has barely risen above the horizon. The benches, used for sleeping, are quickly tidied. Furs folded or simply pushed aside to make room for sitting. The Longhouse is not designed for stillness. Its rhythm is one of constant transformation. At night, it is a bedroom, crowded with sleepers. By day, it is a workshop, a dining hall, a space of governance, and a place of teaching. The same benches that cradle sleeping bodies now support children learning chores or elders spinning tailies. The hearth at the center, though, remains eternal. Around it, all life revolves. The flicker of its flames glows faintly against carved beams overhead, beams darkened by years of soot. The fire is more than warmth. It is safety, light, and the very heart of the household. In its glow, Vikings gathered to eat, to speak, and to rest. And in its smoke, they endured. The first meal of the day is simple. Thick porridge made from barley or oats is ladled into wooden bowls. The taste is plain, sometimes brightened with a splash of milk or a scattering of dried berries, but to the weary bodies of the household it is enough. Children eat hungrily, spilling more than they consume, while adults share quieter, slower bites. Food is not just nourishment. It is routine, the binding ritual that starts every day. As you sit there, bowl in hand, you may feel the strangeness of it all pressing in. The closeness of others, the weight of unwashed wool, the sting of the smoke in your throat, the cacophony of noises. It is overwhelming to modern senses accustomed to space, cleanliness, and silence. And yet, to those who lived within these walls, this was life itself. Crowded, smoky, noisy, but secure. The Longhouse was more than a building. It was the entire world in miniature, where every sound, smell, and shadow carried meaning. The day has only just begun, but already you feel it. This is no holiday retreat, no rustic cabin escape. The Viking Longhouse demands resilience. Its mornings are heavy and raw, stripped of the comfort we often take for granted. To endure even the first hour here is to step far, outside the boundaries of modern life, and to understand why you might not last a day within these walls. When the first bowls of porridge are finished and the embers in the hearth have been coaxed into a steady flame, the Longhouse is fully awake. What was only a murmur in the early morning has now become a chorus of footsteps, voices, and the steady rhythm of daily labor. A Viking longhouse never rested for long. Survival was not built on idleness, but on the constant work of many hands. Each person had a place in this order, whether they were old or young, strong or frail. Even the smallest children, once they could walk and understand, were drawn into the cycle of chores that carried the household through the day. The first tasks often fell to the children and younger members of the family. Buckets were gathered, heavy and clattering, and carried out toward the well or stream. The water they fetched would serve not only for drinking, but for cooking, cleaning, and brewing. Imagine the sharp chill of the morning air against their faces, the icy bite of water sloshing onto bare hands as they trudged back inside. To spill a bucket was to repeat the journey, so even the youngest learned quickly the balance and care required. Inside, the adults moved with practiced efficiency. Women oversaw the rhythm of the hearth, keeping the fire strong enough to cook without letting it burn through the precious stores of wood. Firewood itself was a task to be managed, often gathered by men and boys, stacked outside in careful piles to dry. Without it, the longhouse would be cold and dark, so its value was never underestimated. Livestock demanded attention early in the day as well. In many longhouses, animals shared the interior during the cold months, but they were not left untended. Someone would lead cows outside to graze or milk them directly in the dim morning light. Goats, restless and eager, bleated for food. Chickens scratched and clucked. Their eggs collected quickly before they froze in the northern chill. Dogs wove among the people, half guardians, half companions, always alert to movement at the door. The chores did not stop at tending animals. The longhouse itself required care. Its walls of timber and turf were sturdy, but not immune to the wear of weather. Gaps had to be patched with moss or clay, the roof thatched and reinforced, the floors swept of debris and straw. To live in a Viking home was to accept a relationship with the building itself, a constant cycle of maintenance that bound the people to their shelter. And then came the tools. Few households could afford to neglect them, for every blade, every loom, and every wooden vessel was essential to survival. Men often sharpened axes and knives, working with whetstones as the firelight glimmered off metal edges. Women tended to the tools of weaving, looms, spindles, and distaffs, ensuring that wool could be spun into thread and thread woven into cloth. Each action, small though it might seem, was a strand in the larger fabric of survival. Imagine the soundscape of the longhouse at this hour. The scrape of buckets set down, the thud of wood on the hearth, the hiss of boiling water, the rhythmic brushing of straw across the dirt floor. A hammer strikes against iron outside, where a blacksmith shapes a nail or mends a broken hinge. The voices of women weave through it all, directing children, sharing instructions, or simply speaking softly to one another as they worked. This was no place of idle chatter. Words carried weight, and time could not be wasted. For those unaccustomed to such closeness, the atmosphere might feel overwhelming. Everywhere you look, there is motion. Someone feeding animals, someone repairing a tunic, someone carrying food from the storehouse. Even the older members of the family, too frail for heavier tasks, found their place in the rhythm, often watching younger children or tending to the careful mending of clothes. Meals themselves were a chore of their own. The grain ground into flour did not appear by magic. Women or servants knelt over heavy querns, grinding endlessly, their arms straining as stone turned against stone. The rhythm was slow and steady, and the sound, a grinding hum, could carry through the hall. What emerged was coarse flour, enough to make bread that was hearty, if not soft, the kind of bread that filled the stomach but demanded strong teeth. It is easy to imagine weariness setting in quickly for someone not raised in this way of life. The work began at dawn and continued without pause. There was no notion of weekend rest, no division between work hours and leisure hours. Every waking moment was shaped by necessity. If firewood was low, it had to be gathered. If food was running thin, it had to be stretched, supplemented, or hunted. If the animals were restless, they had to be calmed. If a tool broke, it had to be mended immediately. And yet, for the Vikings, this rhythm was life itself. It was not seen as burden, but as duty, the natural order of existence. Children grew into it, learning through imitation, watching their mothers knead dough or their fathers carve wood, until one day they could perform the same tasks without instruction. To step outside this cycle was rare, perhaps reserved for the injured or the ill. For everyone else, to work was to live. There was, too, a sense of quiet pride woven into the routine. A longhouse that ran smoothly was a household of strength. A fire that never faltered, a roof that never leaked. Animals that thrived. These were signs of honor and respectability. In the sagas, heroes might be praised for their raids and battles, but in daily life, it was the quiet endurance of chores that kept families alive through bitter winters and lean harvests. If you close your eyes, you might picture the scene as a tapestry of motion and sound. One figure bends over the fire, stirring a pot of steaming milk. Another crouches with a bucket, coaxing a cow to stand still for milking. Children's laughter rises as they chase each other between benches, only to be hushed quickly by a stern voice. An elder sits in the corner, sewing a tear in a woolen cloak by the glow of the fire. Outside the door, the steady thud of an axe marks the rhythm of wood being split. All of it happens at once, not in separate rooms, but in one shared space. Privacy is a luxury unknown here. The longhouse is unity. Every task, every noise, every smell intermingled until the household feels less like a group of individuals and more like a single living organism. For a modern visitor, the intensity might feel suffocating. There is no place to retreat, no room for solitude, no pause in the work. The air is heavy with smoke, wool, and sweat. Your eyes follow the endless bustle. Your ears ring with overlapping sounds, and your body feels the press of labor all around you. By the time the sun has fully risen, you are already weary, though the day has barely begun. And this is only the start. The chores of morning will give way to the labors of midday, and then to the gatherings and feasts of evening. The Viking Longhouse is a place of endless transformation, but never of rest. For those born into its world, the rhythm was natural, even comforting. For those stepping into it from afar, the pace alone might be enough to prove why they would not last a single day inside these smoky, crowded walls. By the time the morning chores have settled into rhythm, the longhouse turns its focus toward food once again. The first bowls of porridge may have warmed bellies, but the work of preparing the day's meals is never finished. In a Viking household, the effort of feeding so many people was a constant labor, one that carried on from morning until night, tied to the cycle of fire, storage, and survival. The hearth at the center of the longhouse remains alive all day, not only for warmth, but for cooking. Its flames are coaxed carefully, not too fierce and not too low, so that pots can simmer steadily without wasting precious wood. Around it, the women of the household, and sometimes servants or thralls, if the family owned them, bend to their work. Their movements are practiced, their gestures efficient, the product of years spent watching mothers and grandmothers before them. The ingredients at hand are not the luxuries of modern kitchens. There is no sugar, no chocolate, no fragrant spices carried from faraway lands, at least not for most families. Instead, the meals rely on what can be gathered, stored, or preserved from the land and sea around them. Barley and oats form the foundation, hardy grains that endure the northern climate. Bread is coarse, flat, sometimes dense enough to feel more like a plank than a loaf. Yet it fills the stomach, and that is its purpose. Imagine the sound of the quern stone turning, the rough grind of grain against grain as flour is made. It is a slow and tiring task, often left to younger women or servants, who kneel with bent backs and aching arms, repeating the same motion hour after hour. The flour that results is coarse, speckled with bits of husk, nothing like the white softness of modern loaves. But when mixed with water or buttermilk and pressed against a hot stone by the fire, it becomes flatbread, sturdy, nourishing, and easy to carry. Dairy, too, plays a central role. Cows and goats provide milk, and from it comes butter, cheese, and whey. The butter is thick and often salted, both to preserve it and to flavor otherwise plain meals. Cheese, hard and lasting, becomes a staple for both children and travelers. Buckets of whey are used not only as drink, but also in baking and brewing, a tangy reminder that nothing is wasted in this world. Fish is ever present in the Viking diet. Rivers, lakes, and seas offer their bounty, though preserving it is vital. Fish are salted, dried, or smoked, their strong flavors filling the longhouse as they are hung near the hearth. On days when fresh fish is caught, the meal feels brighter, more varied, though the bones must be picked carefully from each mouthful. Meat, when it appears, is a luxury. Cattle are too precious for slaughter, except on special occasions. Their milk and strength are valued more than their flesh. More often, families eat mutton from sheep or pork from pigs fattened through summer. Hunting provides venison, boar, or even wild fowl, though such hunts are not daily affairs. When a kill is made, it becomes a moment of abundance. Joints of meat roasted over open flame, or boiled into thick stews with whatever vegetables can be gathered. Vegetables are simpler than the variety we know today. Cabbage, leeks, onions, and beans appear most often, sometimes joined by turnips or wild greens. They are chopped coarsely and thrown into simmering pots, mingling with grains and bones to form soups hearty enough to sustain laborers. The broth carries the smoky taste of the fire, the earthy flavor of the soil, and the lingering salt of preserved meats. It is not refined cuisine, but it is sustaining, and in this world, sustenance matters more than delight. Honey, when it can be spared, sweetens the table. It is precious, harvested from wild hives or tended in careful skeps and guarded fiercely. From honey comes mead, the golden drink that glows in the firelight at feasts, but also a touch of sweetness for sauces and broths. To taste honey in a Viking longhouse is to taste luxury itself, a rare glimmer of indulgence in an otherwise plain diet. The work of preparing food is relentless, because it is not only for the present moment. Preserving, storing, and stretching supplies is as important as cooking. In summer and autumn, households work endlessly to dry fish, smoke meat, and ferment vegetables, building stores to last through the endless northern winters. Each meal prepared in the darker months carries with it the memory of those long days of labor and the knowledge that every bite must be managed carefully, for waste could mean hunger. The longhouse fills with the smells of this work. Smoke clings to everything, seeping into bread, into meat, even into the wooden bowls and spoons used at the table. The tang of fish mingles with the sourness of whey, the sharp bite of onions, the sweetness of honey, the dampness of stored grain. To those who live here, it is the smell of home. To an outsider, it might be overwhelming, even unpleasant, too dense for easy breathing. When the food is ready, it is served simply. There are no separate kitchens, no dining rooms with polished tables. Instead, benches along the walls serve as both seats and beds, and planks or boards laid across them act as makeshift tables. Meals are communal, eaten together, bowls and platters passed along, everyone sharing from the same pots. Wooden spoons and knives are common, but forks are unknown. Fingers tear bread, dip into broth, or hold meat by the bone. There is little room for fussiness. Eating is quick, practical, shaped by necessity. Children spill food, dogs circle beneath the benches in hope of scraps, and the fire smokes steadily in the background. Yet within this simplicity lies a sense of unity. The meal is shared not only with family, but with servants, guests, and sometimes travelers. To sit at the hearth and share bread is to belong, if only for a moment, to the life of the Longhouse. But this closeness, this constant sharing, might feel stifling to a modern visitor. There is no quiet kitchen in which to retreat, no private table at which to eat in peace. Every bite is taken under the gaze of others. Every sound of chewing mingles with the chatter and clatter of dozens of lives. The flavors are earthy, heavy, sometimes coarse, nothing like the refined meals of later centuries. And yet, in this environment, such meals are the essence of survival. As the day unfolds, the rhythm of preparing food continues. A new pot is placed over the fire, fresh bread pressed against the hot stone, milk churned into butter. The cycle never stops, for the Longhouse must always be fed, and the hearth must always be alive. It is here, perhaps more than anywhere else, that you understand the unrelenting nature of Viking life. The work of cooking is not a pause from labor, but labor itself, woven into the fabric of survival. To live in a Viking Longhouse is to live with smoke in your lungs, grain dust on your hands, and the constant press of hunger demanding to be met. For the Vikings, this was life, ordinary and enduring. For you, stepping into it only for a day, the sheer weight of constant work might already feel impossible. And yet, the day is far from over. Ahead lie the crafts, the trade, the children's play, and the endless hum of voices that keep the Longhouse alive until night falls once more. As the morning meal fades and the first wave of chores settles, the Longhouse begins to shift into its next rhythm, the rhythm of craft and work. The embers in the hearth still glow, casting a haze of smoke and orange light across beams darkened by years of soot. But now the space is filled with a different kind of activity. The household has eaten, the animals are tended, and survival demands that hands turn to the endless tasks of making and mending. A Viking Longhouse was more than a home. It was a workshop, a place where raw materials were constantly transformed into the tools, clothing, and goods that sustained life. Every family member, young or old, carried skills that contributed to this transformation. There was no idle time, no luxury of sitting without purpose. Even conversation often happened over work, hands busy while words flowed around the fire. The women of the Longhouse were masters of cloth. Wool was the foundation, sheared from sheep in the warmer months, washed, combed, and spun into thread. Inside the hall, women sat with distaff and spindle, twisting fibers with steady patience. The faint whir of the spindle, the creak of the loom, and the soft brush of wool against fingers became a constant soundtrack of the household. Thread by thread, they produced yarn, which was then woven into fabric, heavy for cloaks, lighter for tunics, sometimes dyed with natural colors from plants or lichens. Weaving was not a minor task. It was a central act of wealth and survival. Cloth was not only for clothing, but also for sails that carried ships across seas, and for trade that brought goods from distant lands. To weave well was to ensure both the household's comfort and its prosperity. Imagine the tall vertical loom set against the wall, its wooden frame holding a web of threads, the weaver's hands passing the shuttle back and forth in slow, deliberate rhythm. The sound of it, steady and repetitive, could soothe the mind like the rocking of waves. Men, too, had their crafts, often tied to wood and metal. The Viking world was built upon timber, homes, ships, tools, even toys. Inside or just outside the Longhouse, men bent over beams and planks, carving, shaping, and repairing. The scrape of knives, the sharp bite of axes, the tap of hammers against wood filled the air. Small repairs were constant. A broken bench leg, a cracked bucket, a handle that had worn thin. Larger projects, like building carts or shaping beams for ships, might involve many men working together, their voices blending with the rhythm of tools. Metalwork, though rarer, was just as vital. Not every longhouse had a smith, but many households knew basic mending. Axes and knives dulled quickly and had to be sharpened with whetstones, their edges tested with a thumb or against a scrap of wood. A bent nail might be hammered straight again, a broken clasp repaired with wire. When larger work was needed, the forging of new blades, the shaping of rivets for ships, a smith might set up his tools outside, where the ringing of iron on iron carried across the settlement. That sound, sharp and echoing, cut through the softer noises of weaving and carving, reminding everyone of the strength required to hold a household together. Children, too, had their share in this world of craft. Young girls learned spinning at their mother's knees, their clumsy fingers slowly gaining skill. Boys watched their fathers split wood, handing over tools, fetching water, or carving small figures to practice. Toys themselves were often simple, whittled from scraps of wood. A carved horse, a tiny ship, a doll stuffed with wool. Yet even in play, children were rehearsing the skills they would one day need. The work of craft was not limited to the practical. There was beauty here as well. Vikings carved patterns into wood, shaped brooches from bronze, and wove cloth with stripes or checks of color. Their art was never separate from daily life. It lived in the curve of a spoon's handle, the pattern etched into a comb, the bright beads strung on a thread. In the longhouse, beauty was not a luxury, but an extension of survival, a way to carry meaning into the everyday. Consider, too, the pace of this work. There were no machines to hasten it, no shortcuts to make it easy. Every stitch, every cut, every thread of yarn was made by hand, shaped by hours of patience. For someone accustomed to modern speed, the slowness might feel unbearable. Yet for the Vikings, this steady rhythm was life itself, grounding, essential, and deeply woven into the cycle of each day. The longhouse itself bore witness to this labor. Its benches held half-finished projects, its walls hung with tools, its floor scattered with wood shavings and scraps of wool. Light filtered in faintly through smoke holes, illuminating the movement of hands and the glint of polished wood. The air was alive with texture, the scratch of wool fibers, the rasp of stone against blade, the faint metallic tang of iron in the fire. Outside, some members of the household turned to larger labors. Fields had to be cleared, fences mended, fishing nets untangled and repaired. Nets in particular demanded attention, their fine knots tied by practiced fingers, each one essential to a successful catch. The rhythm of knotting echoed the rhythm of weaving inside, small motions repeated endlessly, creating strength from fragility. Work was not always solitary. Many tasks were shared, with family members sitting close together, passing tools back and forth, offering advice or correction. Conversation flowed in these moments, though rarely without hands in motion. Elders told stories while sharpening blades. Mothers instructed daughters while spinning. Fathers demonstrated carving techniques while whittling small figures. Knowledge was never separate from practice. It was taught through doing, absorbed through repetition, passed from one generation to the next like a living inheritance. To an outsider, the sheer weight of constant labor might feel overwhelming. There is no pause, no clear boundary between work and rest. Even sitting by the fire, hands remain busy. The smoke stings the eyes, the tools weigh on the wrists, and the endless repetition dulls the mind. Yet for the Vikings, this work was the heartbeat of life. Without it, there would be no clothing, no tools, no food preserved for winter, no sails for ships. Every strand of wool, every stroke of the blade, was a thread in the web of survival. And so the longhouse hums with quiet industry, its people bound not only by family, but by the shared labor that keeps them alive. The day stretches forward, filled with the sounds of craft, until the light outside begins to shift and other needs arise. For now, though, the household remains steady, each person bent to their work, shaping the world with their hands. And you, sitting among them, might already feel the ache in your muscles, the sting of smoke in your lungs, the weight of endless tasks pressing on your patience. The Longhouse does not grant respite easily. Its rhythm is unyielding, its demands constant. To endure even these midday hours is to test your endurance, and to see why you would not last a day within these walls. By midday, when the fire in the hearth has burned steadily for hours, and the smell of bread and smoke has thickened the air, the rhythm of the Longhouse sometimes shifts again. For most of the household, the work of weaving, carving, and tending to animals continues without pause. But there are moments, scattered and unpredictable, when the Longhouse opens itself to the wider world. The Vikings were never a people bound only to their own walls. Their lives were shaped by trade, by travel, and by the endless movement of goods and stories across seas and over land. Even the most remote Longhouse was not entirely cut off from this flow, for traders, neighbors, or wandering travelers could arrive at the doorway at any time, bringing with them not only goods, but also news, gossip, and tales of distant places. Imagine the sound of the door creaking open, the heavy wool curtain pulled aside, and the sudden chill of outside air sweeping into the hall. The fire crackles as the draft stirs the smoke, and heads turn toward the figure entering. Sometimes it is a familiar neighbor, a cousin from a nearby farmstead, or a relative visiting with gifts. Other times it is a stranger, weary from travel, mud on their boots and salt in their hair, carrying the scents of the road or the sea upon their clothes. Hospitality was not a matter of choice for the Vikings. It was a duty. To welcome a guest, to offer them food, drink, and a place by the fire, was an expectation woven into the culture. The sagas tell again and again of this obligation. The guest must be received before questions are asked, for the bonds of community and the fear of offending the gods who watched over such customs demanded it. And so a guest is led inside, seated on the benches, and offered bread, cheese, perhaps a bowl of stew, or a horn of ale. The household shifts around them, adjusting to make space, curious eyes watching as the traveler removes their cloak and sets down their bundle. Children whisper to one another, drawn by the novelty of someone new, while adults wait for the moment when the guest begins to speak. It is then that the hall fills not only with the smell of food or the sound of work, but with stories. The visitor might speak of a market in a nearby town, where traders from the south bring bright-colored cloth, glass beads, or iron tools. They might tell of ships docking at a fjord, their sails patched and their crews weary, carrying furs, walrus ivory, or amber to exchange for silver and spices. They might even recount tales of lands farther still, the bustling markets of Hidibi, the monasteries of distant England, or the strange customs of Frankish lords. To those seated in the Longhouse, such words carry weight. Most members of the household will never see those distant places, never walk through the crowded market stalls, or sail across the open sea. But through the voice of the traveler, they glimpse a wider world, one that stretches far beyond the smoky beams overhead. Trade itself might even pass through the household. A neighbor could bring honey to exchange for wool, or a merchant might offer a pouch of salt in return for dried fish. Coins existed, yes, but barter was common. Goods carried value through their usefulness, and every exchange reminded the household of the fragile web that tied them to others. A family with too little grain might survive the winter because they had wool to trade. A farmer with an extra goat might exchange it for iron nails or a polished brooch. And then there were the stories not of markets, but of raids. Some visitors carried the sharp glint of battle in their eyes, their voices low and rough as they told of journeys across the sea. They spoke of monasteries raided, of treasures seized, of battles fought on foreign shores. In the firelight, their words took on a weight that was half warning, half wonder. For children, these tales were thrilling. For elders, they were reminders of danger and risk. For you, sitting among them, The stories might feel harsh, far too vivid for a place already so crowded and exhausting. But not all news was of war. There were sagas of marriages arranged, disputes settled, or alliances forged. The Longhouse was a place of memory as much as labor, and each guest carried threads that wove the community together. A cousin's new child, a chieftain's feast, a neighbor's illness, all were spoken of and carried onward, shaping how each family understood its place in the world. Picture the scene. The hearth's glow flickers across the guest's face as they lean forward, hands spread around a bowl of stew. Their words tumble into the smoky air, weaving images of distant towns and ships on restless seas. Around them, the household falls into a rare hush. The steady scrape of the spindle slows, the hammer is set aside, the children lean in closer. For a moment, the endless rhythm of chores pauses, replaced by the rhythm of voices telling of places beyond these walls. And yet, as captivating as these moments are, they are temporary. The visitor will finish their tale, the bread will be eaten, and the Longhouse will return to its tasks. For the household, the wider world is both fascinating and dangerous, a reminder that life here is not isolated, but also not entirely safe. Trade and stories bring connection, but they also bring the knowledge of storms, raids, and hunger elsewhere, things that could just as easily arrive here tomorrow. For someone unaccustomed to this life, the arrival of a guest might be a delight, a moment of excitement in an otherwise exhausting day. But in truth, even this exchange carries its weight. More mouths to feed, more space to share, more stories that may unsettle as much as inspire. In the crowded, smoky air of the Longhouse, the presence of outsiders is never without cost. Still, these moments reveal something vital about Viking life. The Longhouse was not only a shelter against the cold, but a bridge to the wider world. Goods and stories flowed through its doors, binding the household to communities near and far. Without trade, without news, without these fleeting connections, the Longhouse would be cut adrift, left to face the northern winters alone. And so, when the visitor finally rises to leave, pulling their cloak tight against the wind, the household watches with mixed feelings. Relief that the space will quiet again, perhaps, but also gratitude for the glimpse of a larger world. The door closes, the curtain falls back into place, and the draft settles once more into smoke and shadow. Inside, the benches creak as the people return to their work. The loom resumes its steady beat, the spindle whirs, the hammer strikes against wood. The guest is gone, but their words linger, carried in whispers from one end of the hall to the other. And as the fire crackles, you realize that the constant weaving together of daily survival and distant tales, is part of what keeps the Longhouse alive. For you, though, the crush of bodies, the endless work, and now the flood of voices and stories might already be too much. A single morning in the Longhouse feels heavy, endless, and overwhelming, and still the day presses forward. The children must be tended, the animals fed again, and the hours filled with the unceasing rhythm of life. The Longhouse allows no pause, no escape, no silence. And it is here, in this relentless flow, that you begin to see why a modern soul would struggle to last even a single day within these walls. The Longhouse is never truly quiet, but it is perhaps at its noisiest when children are at play. For all the smoke, the labor, and the heavy rhythm of daily chores, the Longhouse is also filled with young voices, laughter, arguments, and the scuffling of small feet across the packed earth floor. Children in a Viking household were not separate from the world of adults. They did not vanish into nurseries or classrooms. They lived their days alongside their families, learning through imitation, absorbing skills through constant presence, and contributing to the work as soon as they were able. Childhood was not a sheltered time of endless play, but neither was it devoid of joy. It was a mixture, bursts of laughter and games, balanced against the steady weight of chores and expectations. Imagine the scene. Near the hearth, a mother spins wool on her spindle, her hands deft and practiced. At her feet sits a small child, tugging at scraps of fiber, twisting them clumsily between little fingers. The result is a tangled mess, but the act itself is a first lesson. A few steps away, boys wrestle on the benches, their shouts echoing through the smoky air until a stern voice cuts through and sends them scattering. Even in punishment, they are learning. The Longhouse is a space of shared order where their noise must be balanced against the needs of others. Children's chores often began as soon as they could walk steadily and understand commands. Buckets of water needed carrying, firewood had to be gathered, and animals required tending. The smallest were sent on errands within the hall, passing tools from one adult to another, fetching scraps for the fire, or minding younger siblings. These tasks, though minor, carried importance. They wove children into the fabric of survival, teaching them that every hand, no matter how small, had value. Yet chores did not erase play. Children invented games from the world around them. A stick could become a sword, a carved piece of wood, a toy horse, a handful of stones, the pieces of a simple game. They chased each other between the benches, hid beneath cloaks, and mimicked the work of adults in miniature. Play was never separate from learning. It was practice, rehearsal for the roles they would grow into. Boys, especially, were drawn to the tools of warriors. Wooden swords clashed in mock battles, shields made from planks, or even lids stood firm against blows. They watched older men sparring outside, imitating their movements with fierce determination. The sagas they heard at night, tales of Odin, Thor, and great heroes, lived vividly in their games. In their shouts and laughter, one could hear echoes of raids not yet undertaken, of battles not yet fought. Girls, too, were trained in their roles from an early age. They sat with mothers and grandmothers, learning to spin, weave, and cook. Dolls made of cloth or carved wood taught them the gestures of caretaking, while simple practice with looms and needles prepared them for the essential work of creating cloth. Yet this was not drudgery to them. It was a chance to join the circle of women, to feel pride in the tasks that defined the household strength. Still, the boundaries were not always strict. Viking children could cross lines, exploring all kinds of play and work. A girl might swing a stick like a sword. A boy might help churn butter or mend nets. Childhood allowed a certain fluidity, even if adulthood would eventually assign firmer roles. There was also the ever-present influence of stories. In the evenings, when adults told sagas by firelight, children listened with wide eyes. These tales were not mere entertainment. They were lessons in courage, loyalty, and fate. Gods and heroes loomed large in their imaginations, shaping the way they understood the world. By morning, those same stories spilled into their games. A boy might proclaim himself Thor, swinging his wooden club as if it were Mjolnir. A girl might pretend to be a queen, directing her servants with authority, echoing the voices of strong women she had seen in her family. But the Longhouse was not a playground built for children. The dangers were ever present. The hearth, always alight, could burn unwary hands. Tools left within reach could cut or maim. The animals, restless and unpredictable, could kick or bite. Children learned caution quickly, for accidents were not easily forgiven in a world where every life mattered to the household's survival. Older siblings often watched the younger, and a single moment of neglect could lead to harsh reprimand. Education in the Longhouse was not written in books or carved on tablets. It was lived every hour of every day. Children learned to tell time not by clocks, but by the movement of the sun and the needs of the animals. They learned to count through trade, to measure through weaving, to sing through sagas, and to remember through repetition. Knowledge was woven into the rhythm of survival, and every mistake carried immediate consequence. Still, there was tenderness here, even in this smoky, crowded hall. A mother smoothing her child's hair, as they dozed by the fire. A father carving a small toy during a rare quiet moment. Older siblings leading the younger in games that were half play, half instruction. The Longhouse may have been demanding, but it was also a space of constant connection, where children grew surrounded by family, never apart, always included. To a modern visitor, the presence of so many children underfoot might be overwhelming. Their noise echoes in the enclosed hall. Their games spill into the paths of adults. Their questions come in endless streams. There is no escape from their energy, no quiet room to place them in, no separate world of schools and playgrounds to absorb their restlessness. Children here are as present as the smoke in the air, as unavoidable as the creak of the benches. And yet, without them, the hall would feel empty. Their laughter is the counterbalance to the weight of work. Their play reminds everyone that life continues, that the future is always arriving in small, unruly bodies who will one day take on the same endless rhythm of survival. For the Vikings, this was natural, expected, even comforting. But for someone not raised in such closeness, the constant presence of children, their chores, their games, their noise, might prove exhausting. Already you may feel your patience thin, your senses overburdened, and still the day presses on. Ahead lies the presence of warriors, the authority of women, the closeness of animals, each new layer of life within the Longhouse adding to the weight. The Longhouse does not pause, and neither do its children. Their footsteps, voices, and laughter echo through the smoky beams as the hours slip forward, another reminder of why you, stepping into this world for only a day, might not last long inside. The Longhouse was not only a place of family, of weaving, of chores and children. It was also a place where the presence of warriors lingered, shaping the atmosphere even in the quietest moments. For the Vikings, warfare was not a distant profession reserved for a few. It was an ever-present possibility, a role that many men, and sometimes women, carried alongside their duties as farmers, craftsmen, and fathers. Inside the Longhouse, the echoes of that identity could always be felt. Along the timber-bird walls, weapons hung in silent rows. A spear leaned against a beam, its iron tip catching the firelight with a faint gleam. Axes, their blades sharp and sturdy, rested beside wooden shields painted with simple designs or left bare. Swords, rarer and precious, sometimes lay sheathed near their owners, polished with care, the marks of the smith's hammer still visible along the steel. These were not decorative trophies. They were tools of survival, as essential as the loom or the cooking pot, carried on raids, hunts, and into battles that could decide a family's fate. The Longhouse itself bore the weight of these weapons. Children grew up with them, always in view, learning from the earliest age to respect their power. A boy might sit quietly beside his father, watching as he sharpened a blade with steady strokes of a whetstone. The sound, rasping, rhythmic, became as familiar as the crackle of the fire. Each stroke carried with it a sense of readiness, a reminder that life in this world could turn dangerous at any moment. Training often began early. Boys practiced with wooden swords or staves, mimicking the movements of older men. Outside the Longhouse, they sparred in the dirt, their laughter and shouts carrying across the settlement. These games, though playful, were also serious lessons. To swing a sword, to block a blow, to hold a shield steady, these were skills they would one day need. Inside, when the weather turned harsh, fathers might correct a son's grip on a staff or demonstrate how to thrust a spear. The lessons woven into everyday conversation, as naturally as instructions on carrying water or tending animals. For visitors unaccustomed to this environment, the constant presence of weapons might feel unsettling. In most modern homes, blades and spears hanging by the hearth would suggest danger, unease, or even violence. But here, they were part of life itself, no more unusual than a basket of wool or a pile of firewood. The The Viking world was one in which the boundary between home and battle was thin, and the Longhouse reflected that truth. Beyond the weapons, there were also the stories. Warriors carried their experiences back into the hall, recounting battles and raids in voices low and steady. By firelight, they spoke of narrow escapes, of comrades lost, of treasures seized from distant lands. The children listened wide-eyed, the women silent but attentive, the elders nodding with approval or warning. These stories were not told for glory alone, but to remind the household of both the risks and the rewards of the warrior's path. Clothing, too, carried the mark of the warrior. A cloak fastened with a heavy brooch, boots hardened by long marches, or a scar that ran across a cheek. These were silent signals of battles fought. Even when men sat quietly on benches, their presence carried a weight shaped by training and experience. The Longhouse was not only a place of weaving and cooking. It was also a place where the sharp edge of war was never far from mind. Yet the warrior's role was not only about violence. It was also about protection. Families slept more easily, knowing that strong arms and sharp blades were within reach. The Longhouse was a crowded, vulnerable place, filled with children, animals, and stores of food, all of it precious, all of it a potential target. To have warriors under its roof was to have guardians, people who stood between the household and the dangers of the world outside, raiders, wild beasts, or even rival neighbors. Still, the tension this brought was real. Imagine the unease of sleeping each night with weapons hanging above you, the knowledge that danger could demand their use at any time. For someone from a world of locks, walls, and laws, this constant readiness would feel exhausting. The air itself seemed to carry it, a tautness beneath the ordinary bustle, a sense that the Longhouse was not only a home, but also a fortress, always half prepared for defense. The women of the household felt this presence too. While their primary roles lay in weaving and managing the hall, many were not strangers to weapons. Some knew how to wield an axe or a knife, trained enough to defend themselves if need arose. Sagas speak of shield maidens, women who fought alongside men, and though such figures may not have been common, the possibility lingered in the imagination, even within the daily rhythm of chores. The idea of strength and defense was never far away. Consider the rhythm of the Longhouse at midday, the whir of the spindle, the scrape of wood being carved, the bubbling of a pot on the fire, and beside it, the rasp of steel against stone as a warrior sharpens his blade. Each sound blends into the whole, neither out of place nor alarming. It is simply the way of life here, a balance of creation and destruction, of nurturing and defense. For children, the warrior's presence was both inspiring and intimidating. They learned respect for weapons, caution in play, and admiration for the bravery of their elders. A boy might dream of one day owning a sword, though he knew such treasures were rare. A girl might imagine herself standing tall with a shield, recalling the tales of heroines told by the fire. The Longhouse itself, smoky and crowded, became their first training ground, shaping their understanding of strength and duty. To you, stepping into this space from the outside, the constant weight of the warrior's presence might already feel heavy. The sight of blades gleaming in the firelight, the sound of steel being sharpened, the smell of leather and iron mixing with smoke, all of it would press upon you. There is no escape from it. No separate space free from the reminder that survival in this world depends not only on weaving and farming, but also on fighting. And yet, for the Vikings, this balance was natural. The Longhouse was not only a shelter against the cold, but also a place where warriors lived, trained, and remembered. It was a space where the tools of war hung beside the tools of home, each as necessary as the other. As the day continues, the warrior's presence lingers, even when hidden in quiet gestures. A father showing a son how to hold a knife safely. A mother warning a child not to touch the axe by the door. A scarred man gazing into the fire, silent, remembering battles long past. These moments weave together into the fabric of the Longhouse, reminding everyone that beneath the rhythms of work and play lies the ever-present need for strength. And so, as you sit among them, the air heavy with smoke and iron, you may feel the truth settling in. This is not a world built for comfort, nor a home free from the shadow of violence. The Longhouse is a place where warriors live as fathers, brothers, sons, and protectors, and where the weight of their presence shapes every moment of daily life. If the Longhouse was the body of Viking life, then women were its beating heart. Their presence shaped the rhythm of the hall more than any sword or tool. In a world where survival hinged on constant labor, women carried the authority, skill, and steadiness that kept the household alive. Their roles were many, their influence quiet but absolute, woven into every beam and bench of the smoky hall. At the center of this influence was the mistress of the Longhouse, often called the Husfreyja. She was more than wife and mother. She was steward, organizer, and guardian of the home's prosperity. The keys to the household stores, to food, clothing, and wealth, often hung at her belt, a clear symbol of her authority. When she walked through the hall, the jingling of those keys was as commanding as the flash of a warrior's blade. Women oversaw the hearth, and through the hearth, they oversaw life itself. The fire was never allowed to die, and it was women who tended it, adding fuel, managing embers, and cooking the meals that sustained the household. Their skill in stretching supplies, in turning grain and milk into sustaining food, often meant the difference between hunger and survival. Around the fire, their presence was constant, their voices steady, guiding children, scolding when needed, soothing when possible. But their role was far more than cooking. Women were the keepers of cloth, and cloth was wealth. To spin wool into thread, to weave thread into fabric, to sew fabric into garments, these were tasks that required patience, precision, and endless labor. A household with skilled women could clothe its members, trade excess cloth for other goods, and equip its warriors with sails for their ships. In many ways, the prosperity of a family rose and fell on the strength of its women's weaving. The loom itself was a towering presence in the Longhouse, leaning against a wall, threads stretched taut across its frame. Women stood before it day after day, moving the shuttle back and forth, their hands shaping not only fabric, but the future of the household. The sound of the loom was a heartbeat in itself, steady, repetitive, soothing in its rhythm. To outsiders, it might seem monotonous, but to those who lived within its sound, it was the pulse of life. Women also carried the knowledge of healing. They gathered herbs from the fields and forests, dried them, and stored them in small pouches or jars. They knew which leaves soothed a cough, which roots eased pain, which flowers could calm a restless child. In a world without doctors or medicines as we know them, this knowledge was precious, passed down from mother to daughter like a secret inheritance. A woman's hands might be rough from weaving and cooking, but they were also the hands that bound wounds, mixed poultices, and whispered prayers over the sick. The authority of women was not hidden. It was visible in daily life. If the husband or father was away, raiding, trading, or hunting, the wife managed the Longhouse in his absence. She directed the servants, disciplined the children, organized the work, and ensured that the household remained steady. Even when men were present, her influence was felt. Decisions about food, cloth, and hospitality often rested with her, and her word carried weight. Stories and sagas even speak of women who wielded sharp tongues and sharper minds. They offered counsel in disputes, spurred men to courage in battle, or shamed them when they faltered. A woman's voice, though not always sung in halls of power, could shape the choices of warriors and chieftains alike. Inside the Longhouse, it was clear. Without women, the household could not stand. And yet, their lives were far from easy. The work was endless, unrelenting. From dawn till the fire dimmed at night, their hands rarely rested. They spun wool while rocking cradles, stirred pots while scolding children, and wove cloth while listening to travelers' tales. Their backs ached from bending, their fingers cracked from cold and labor, their eyes stung from smoke. Still they pressed on, for there was no alternative. To a modern visitor, the sight of such ceaseless work might feel harsh, even unfair. You might long to reach for silence, for a moment alone, for tools and comforts that make such labor lighter. But the women of the Longhouse found pride in their skill, dignity in their endurance, and strength in the authority they carried. They were not hidden shadows, but the visible core of family and community. Their presence also carried a spiritual weight. In Norse belief, women were often linked to the threads of fate, woven by the Norns, the mysterious beings who shaped destiny itself. Perhaps it was no coincidence that mortal women wove threads as well, their hands echoing the cosmic work of those who wove the fates of gods and men. Each spindle, each loom, each strand of yarn seemed to carry a whisper of that deeper connection, tying the everyday to the eternal. Children looked to their mothers not only for care, but for instruction. Daughters learned to spin and weave, to tend the fire and brew ale. Sons learned respect for the authority of women, knowing that their mother's word in the household was final. These lessons were not written, but lived, and they carried forward into every new generation. Even in the busiest hours of the day, when voices overlapped and chores pressed heavily, there was a steadiness to the presence of women. They were the ones who smoothed the disorder, who carried the rhythm forward. Without them, the Longhouse would descend into chaos. With them, it endured. Picture the scene: smoke curling toward the beams overhead, the fire glowing at the center, and beside it, a woman stirring a pot with one hand while reaching to calm a child with the other. Behind her, another woman bends over the loom, her shuttle moving in steady rhythm. Nearby, an older woman threads a needle, mending a cloak with careful stitches. Their movements are constant, unbroken, weaving together the fabric of the household itself. To you, sitting among them, the weight of their labor might feel overwhelming. The smoke stings, the noise presses in, the endless chores blur together. And yet, through it all, the women remain steady, their presence anchoring the hall. The Longhouse is their domain, and within its smoky walls, their authority is absolute. It is here, perhaps more than anywhere else, that the truth of the Longhouse becomes clear. Warriors may carry swords, children may bring laughter, but it is the women who sustain life. They are the heart that beats beneath the smoke, the hands that weave survival from thread and flame. Without them, the Longhouse would crumble, its people left adrift in the cold. And so, as the day moves forward, you begin to see why you would not last here. The work is endless, the demands relentless, and the authority of women unyielding. To step into their world is to step into a rhythm that allows no pause, no weakness, no retreat. It is a rhythm shaped by smoke, by cloth, by fire, and by the steady hands of women who hold the household together. Step further into the Viking Longhouse, and you will find it is not only a place for people. It is also a shelter for animals, the quiet and not so quiet companions of daily life. The smoky hall is shared with cows, goats, chickens, and dogs, their presence woven into the rhythm of survival as deeply as the hearth or the loom. In the long, dark winters of the North, animals were too valuable to leave exposed to the cold. Their warmth, their milk, their eggs, and their muscle were lifelines for the household. To protect them was to protect the people themselves. And so, the Longhouse became more than a human dwelling. It became a shared space, a mingling of voices, smells, and movements, where animals were family as much as livestock. Imagine the soundscape. At one end of the hall, a cow shifts heavily on its hooves, its low bellow echoing in the smoky air. A goat bleats sharply, tugging at its tether. Chickens flutter and scratch, their feathers rustling, their clucks sudden and loud. A dog pads between the benches, its claws clicking softly against the packed earth floor, pausing to sniff at scraps near the hearth. All of it blends into the constant hum of the longhouse, a backdrop that never fades into silence. The smells, too, are inescapable. The sharp tang of manure mixes with the sweet scent of hay, the musky odor of animals pressed close against human bodies, and the ever-present smoke from the fire. To modern senses, the combination might be unbearable, a heaviness in the nose and throat that no window can relieve. But to the Vikings, it was the familiar aroma of life itself, a sign that their animals were safe, their household secure. Cows were among the most precious. They were not only sources of milk, butter, and cheese, but also symbols of wealth and prosperity. A family with many cows stood higher in status than one with only a few. Each morning, women crouched low with buckets, milking by hand in the dim light, the warm spray striking the pail with a steady rhythm. Children sometimes joined, learning the careful patience required, though many more preferred to sneak tastes of the frothy milk, grinning when scolded. Goats were smaller, but no less important. Hardy and adaptable, they thrived where cows struggled, climbing easily over rocky ground and nibbling on what little greenery remained through the cold months. Their milk, though less abundant, was rich, and their meat could sustain families when other supplies dwindled. Their voices carried sharp and insistent through the hall, demanding attention, reminding everyone that their needs, too, shaped the rhythm of the day. Chickens added their own presence, fluttering between benches, scratching for crumbs, and laying eggs that were carefully gathered each morning. Their clucks and squawks often startled the youngest children, who chased them with laughter, only to be hushed by tired mothers. Their feathers sometimes found their way into bedding, softening the hard benches just slightly, a small comfort in a harsh world. Dogs, however, were something different. They were not livestock, but guardians and companions. Large, shaggy, alert, they guarded the longhouse with loyalty, their ears pricking at every sound outside. They barked at strangers, growled at wolves lurking near the edges of the settlement, and followed their masters faithfully into the fields or onto the sea. Inside, they curled near the fire, their warmth shared freely with those who stretched beside them. To the Vikings, dogs were more than animals. They were protectors, trusted, and beloved. Sheep, too, had their place, their wool sheared and spun into thread, their bodies providing meat when needed. Their bleating filled the hall, sometimes soft and plaintive, sometimes loud and insistent. Their presence was a reminder of the cycle of craft and survival. Wool turned to cloth, cloth turned to trade, trade turned to wealth. The closeness of animals was practical, but it was also spiritual. In Norse mythology, animals were companions of the gods, Odin's wolves, Freya's cats, Thor's goats. To share the hall with beasts was not only necessity, but part of a worldview where animals and humans walked side by side, each bound to the other in fate and survival. Still, for you, stepping into this world, the experience might feel overwhelming. The crowded benches already press you against strangers. The smoke already stings your eyes. Now add the restless movements of animals, the sharp smells, the sudden sounds. A cow shifts and nearly brushes your arm. A goat bleats in your ear. A chicken flutters onto a bench before being shooed away. A dog noses at your hands, searching for scraps. The longhouse is alive in every corner, its air thick with breath, human and animal alike. This closeness also carried risks. Illness could spread quickly between beasts and people, especially in the winter when all were confined together. Fleas, lice, and other pests thrived in the warmth of furs and feathers. Yet the Vikings accepted these risks, for the alternative, to lose their animals to the cold, was far worse. Better to endure the smells, the pests, and the noise than to face hunger when winter's grip tightened. There was, too, a certain comfort in their presence. The lowing of cows and the clucking of hens were familiar sounds, reassuring in their constancy. The warmth of bodies pressed close against the cold reminded everyone of their shared struggle. Children found playmates among the animals, laughing as dogs chased them or goats nudged them with curious noses. Even the elders, weary from years of labor, sometimes smiled as they watched a kitten peck curiously at the floor or a dog curl contentedly by the fire. Picture the scene. The fire glows at the center, its smoke curling upward. Around it, families stir pots, weave cloth, and sharpen blades. And always, just beyond the circle of human motion, animals shift and stir, their sounds and smells filling the hall. A cow's steady breath rises into the air. A dog's ears twitch as it dreams by the fire. A goat scratches its horns against a beam, the sound echoing in the smoky chamber. This is no human-only world. It is a shared dwelling, a mingling of lives in the struggle for survival. For modern senses, the longhouse would be too much. The smoke, the noise, the closeness of bodies, human and animal alike, would press upon you until your patience thinned. But for the Vikings, this was life, ordinary and necessary. Animals were not only wealth, not only food, but companions in the long struggle against cold and hunger. Their presence was woven into every hour, every meal, every story told by firelight. And so, as the day moves forward, you realize another truth of the longhouse. It is not only crowded with people, it is alive with creatures of every kind, each adding their voice, their warmth, their labor to the shared world beneath the smoky beams. To last a day here is not only to endure the noise of children or the press of chores. It is to live with animals under your roof, their presence inescapable, their needs as pressing as your own. Close your eyes, and you will hear the longhouse before you see it. It is never silent. From the moment the first embers glow in the morning to the time when the last voices fade into uneasy sleep, the hall hums with sound. It is a soundscape of survival, layered, constant, and inescapable. The fire is the heartbeat of this world. It crackles steadily at the center, flames licking wood, embers sighing into ash. Every now and then, a log collapses with a soft thud, sending sparks into the smoky air. Around it, pots simmer, bubbling and hissing as steam rises. The fire song is low and steady, a background rhythm that never stops, a reminder of warmth and life. Yet the fire is only one note in the longhouse's symphony. Add to it the sounds of animals, and the hall grows louder. Cows shift on their hooves, their breath heavy, their lowing deep. Goats bleat sharply, impatient for food or restless in their tethers. Chickens cluck and scratch, their feathers rustling, wings flapping suddenly as they jostle for space. Dogs bark or growl when the door opens, claws clicking across the packed earth as they patrol the benches for scraps. Each sound blends into the whole, filling the air until silence feels like an impossible dream. Layered atop the animals come the voices of people. Children chatter endlessly, their games and arguments echoing beneath the beams. A boy shouts in triumph during a mock sword fight. A girl sings softly to a doll made of wool. Babies cry, sometimes gently, sometimes with piercing wails that cut through every other sound. Mothers soothe them with murmurs, their voices low but constant. Adults speak over this din, giving instructions, trading stories, scolding children, or discussing the tasks ahead. Their words rise and fall, some sharp, some gentle, but always present. A man laughs loudly at a jest. A woman calls for water. An elder mutters advice from the corner, his voice gravelly with age. Even in the quietest moments, whispers drift through the hall, carrying across the benches, never quite still. Then there are the sounds of work. The whir of the spindle, the shuttle sliding back and forth on the loom, the rasp of a whetstone across steel, the scrape of a knife against wood as spoons are carved, the thud of an axe splitting kindling, the steady crunch of grain being ground between quern stones. Each task has its sound, and together they form the music of labor, a ceaseless rhythm that fills every corner of the hall. Outside, the world adds its own voice. The wind moans through the cracks in the walls, rattling the thatch on the roof. Rain patters against the turf, dripping slowly through gaps to fall onto the floor. In winter, snow presses heavy on the beams, its silence broken only by the muffled howls of wolves beyond the settlement. Each time the door opens, these outside sounds rush in, mingling with the clamor inside before fading again behind the heavy wool curtain. For a Viking, these sounds were the pulse of home. They were reassuring in their constancy. A silent longhouse was a dead one, a hall without children, without animals, without work or laughter. Noise meant life, meant survival, meant community. To sit in the hall and hear nothing would be to feel fear, to sense emptiness and loss. But for you, accustomed to quiet rooms, closed doors, and walls that muffle sound, the longhouse would feel overwhelming. There is no escape from the noise, no pause in the constant layering of voices, clatter, and cries. Even sleep is filled with it. The snores of men, the soft murmurs of women, the occasional bleat or bark in the night. Silence is a luxury unknown here, a concept foreign to these smoky walls. There is, too, a rhythm in the noise. Listen closely, and you might hear it. The crackle of the fire steadies the pace. The spindle whirs in soft intervals. A child's laughter bursts and fades. The cow lows in steady breaths. Each sound, though chaotic, falls into patterns, weaving together like threads on a loom. The longhouse is noisy, yes, but its noise is also a kind of music, the music of survival. And in this music, there are moments of beauty. The rise of voices joining in a song as women work together at the loom. The rhythm of hammering outside, echoing like a drum. The story told by firelight, each word drawing silence for a heartbeat before the hall erupts in laughter. The bark of a dog warning of strangers, followed by the hush of anticipation. These moments shape the longhouse as surely as the beams and the walls. Still, the weight of it presses on you. There is no quiet morning coffee, no silent afternoon, no evening of hushed calm. From dawn until night, sound surrounds you, burrows into you, becomes inescapable. For the Vikings, it was the sound of life. For you, it might be the sound of exhaustion. Another reason why lasting a day in this hall would test your patience and endurance. Picture it now, the fire crackling, the loom creaking, the animals stirring, the voices overlapping. A chicken flutters, a child cries, a man laughs, a dog barks. The wind moans outside, the rain taps the roof, and still the spindle turns. The longhouse is alive with sound, as constant as breath, as steady as time itself. And in this unbroken chorus, you begin to understand the Viking longhouse was not only a shelter of wood and turf. It was a living, breathing organism, its heartbeat carried in the rhythm of fire, its breath in the voices of people and animals, its song in the endless sounds that filled its smoky air. To endure it, to live in it, was to surrender to that music. To resist it, to crave silence, was to see how quickly the hall could wear you down. The Viking longhouse was not only a place for family and daily work, it was also a place of welcome. Hospitality, for the people of the North, was more than courtesy. It was duty, a sacred expectation. To refuse a guest food, warmth, or shelter was to risk dishonor, and perhaps even the disfavor of the gods. And so, when word came that visitors approached, or when the heavy curtain at the doorway stirred and new figures stepped inside, the household shifted at once. Preparing for guests was no small task. The longhouse was already crowded with people and animals, already smoky and loud. But now, every movement took on fresh urgency. Benches were cleared of half-finished work, furs shaken and laid neatly across the wooden planks. Tools were set aside. Looms shifted, buckets moved to the corners. The hall was transformed, not emptied of its daily life, but rearranged so that guests could be seated with dignity. The mistress of the household, the Husfreyja, directed much of this preparation. Her voice cut through the noise with calm authority, assigning tasks swiftly. Children sent to fetch more water, servants ordered to carry in extra food. Younger women instructed to lay out clean bowls and horns for ale. The clink of pottery, the shuffle of wooden vessels, the rustle of cloaks being straightened, all filled the smoky air with a sense of order and anticipation. Hospitality began with food. Bread was pulled from storage, coarse loaves sliced and set upon wooden platters. Cheese was cut, its sharp scent filling the air. Butter, thick and salted, was brought forth in small pots, ready to spread across slices of bread. If the household had fish or meat to spare, it was laid into pots to warm, the smell of roasting or stewing soon joining the ever-present smoke. For honored guests, honey might be offered, its sweetness a rare luxury. And then there was ale. No welcome was complete without it. The great barrels, kept cool in the earth or stored near the walls, were tapped, and the amber liquid ladled into horns or simple cups. Its froth bubbled as it was carried to the hearth, ready to be raised in greeting. Mead, brewed from honey, might also be poured if the household could afford such generosity. To drink with guests was to share not only sustenance but trust, a bond formed across the rim of a shared horn. The space itself shifted too. The benches nearest the fire were reserved for guests of honor. These were the warmest seats, the brightest in the hall, places where the light of the flames danced across faces and weapons. Family members stepped aside to make room. Moving to the darker edges of the hall, their presence still felt but less visible. The guests would be placed where all could see them, a sign of respect and openness. Children watched all of this with wide eyes. For them, the arrival of guests was both excitement and lesson. They were reminded to sit quietly, to observe, to learn how to behave with dignity. They saw their parents' gestures of welcome, heard the tone of their voices, and absorbed the rules of hospitality that they, too, would one day uphold. When the guests finally entered, cloaks heavy with travel, faces flushed from cold wind or weary from long roads, the hall came alive. Voices rose in greeting, the fire crackled, and bowls and horns were pressed into their hands before questions were asked. The warmth of the hearth wrapped around them, the smoky air thick but protective, the bustle of the household reshaping itself to embrace them. Stories often followed quickly. Guests were expected to share news, to tell of where they had come from, what they had seen, who they had met along the way. Their words brought the wider world into the Longhouse, tales of markets, of storms, of battles, of feasts in distant halls. The household leaned in, listening, the loom silent for once, the spindle paused, the sharpening stone set aside. Hospitality was not only about feeding the body, but also about feeding the mind with news and stories. There was ritual in this as well. Bread was broken, horns raised, toasts made to gods, ancestors, and the strength of friendship. The gestures were familiar, repeated across countless halls, binding people together through shared words and actions. Even strangers were drawn into the web of kinship, at least for a night. Yet all of this came with strain. To prepare for guests meant stretching supplies, using food that might have been saved for another day. It meant crowding the hall even further, finding space where there was little to give. It meant more noise, more bodies, more heat, more smoke. To modern eyes, it would feel overwhelming, exhausting. A house already crowded now swelled to bursting, every corner filled, every breath carrying the weight of so many lives pressed together. Still, for the Vikings, hospitality was survival. In a harsh land, a guest today might be a host tomorrow. The bonds formed by sharing bread and ale could mean safety in times of famine, allies in times of war. To close the door against the traveler was to close the door against fate itself, to risk becoming the one turned away when your own need was greatest. Picture the scene: the benches drawn close to the fire, the table boards laid with bread, cheese, and steaming stew. The guests sit with cloaks loosened, faces glowing in the firelight, horns of ale raised. Around them, the household hums with motion. Women moving steadily with bowls, men leaning forward with questions, children peeking from behind furs to catch a glimpse of strangers' faces. Dogs curl at their feet, chickens flutter into corners, the smoke swirls above. It is crowded, chaotic, but alive with welcome. For you, stepping into this hall, the press of it might already feel unbearable. The smoke clings, the noise rings in your ears, the closeness leaves no space to breathe. And yet, in this very weight lies the heart of Viking life. Hospitality is not easy, not comfortable, but it is essential, binding one hall to another, one family to another, one life to another. The Longhouse, smoky and crowded though it may be, becomes something larger in these moments. It becomes a place where the bonds of community stretch outward, reaching beyond the turf walls into the wider world. To endure it, to live in it, is to surrender to this rhythm of welcome, to carry both the burden and the honor of offering shelter to another soul. When the Longhouse welcomed guests, the atmosphere often grew louder, warmer, and more crowded. But when a true feast was prepared, the hall transformed completely. It became not just a place of shelter or daily survival, but a gathering place of celebration, fellowship, and ritual. Feasts were rare. Food could not be wasted lightly in the north, but when they came, they filled the smoky air with laughter, song, and the deep satisfaction of shared abundance. The preparations began long before the first horn of ale was raised. The mistress of the hall directed the work with quiet authority, ensuring that every corner of the Longhouse played its part. Benches were cleared, boards laid out for food, furs shaken and spread across the seats. Lamps were filled with oil, their small flames adding brightness to the glow of the fire. Children scurried with buckets of water, arms aching, while servants and thralls hurried to grind grain, churn butter, and fetch stores from the outbuildings. The hearth became the center of all motion. Pots simmered, filled with stews of meat, beans, onions, and cabbage, the rich scent rising to mingle with smoke. Bread baked against hot stones, its coarse crust browning slowly. Fish, caught fresh or pulled from stores of salt and smoke, sizzled over flames. If fortune allowed, joints of pork or lamb were roasted, their fat dripping, their smell carrying through every corner of the hall. Ale and mead flowed freely. The barrels were tapped, horns polished, bowls set out in neat rows. The frothy drink foamed as it was ladled, golden and glowing in the flickering light. The sound of liquid pouring was constant, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the low hum of voices rising in anticipation. When the guests arrived, the hall swelled with motion and sound. Cloaks were cast aside, weapons leaned against beams, and laughter filled the air as old friends embraced and strangers were introduced. The benches near the fire grew crowded, shoulders pressed against shoulders, the heat of bodies and flames mingling until the hall seemed to glow with warmth. Dogs wove between the guests, hopeful for scraps, while children darted through the crush, wide-eyed at the abundance of food. The feast began with ritual. A horn of ale was raised, toasts made to gods, ancestors, and the strength of friendship. Odin, god of wisdom, might be invoked, or Thor, protector of mankind. Freyr and Freya, deities of fertility and abundance, were thanked for the harvest, the hunt, or the sea's bounty. The toasts echoed through the hall, each voice joining in a chorus that bound the household together. Then came the eating. Platters were passed down the benches, wooden bowls filled and refilled. Bread was torn and dipped into stews, butter spread thickly, cheese crumbled and shared. Meat was sliced and handed out, fingers sticky with grease, lips shining in the firelight. There were no fine manners here, only the joy of food after long labor, the satisfaction of eating until the stomach felt heavy and warm. Voices rose louder as the feast went on. Laughter broke across the hall, shouts of approval rang out, and the clatter of bowls and horns echoed beneath the beams. Stories flowed as freely as the ale, each tale more vivid as the night deepened. A man recounted a hunting trip, his hands gesturing wide to show the size of the stag. Another spoke of a raid, his voice lowering, drawing his listeners in before ending with a triumphant laugh. Women shared news of weaving, brewing, or children, their voices steady amid the din. And then there was music. A lyre might be strummed, its strings humming softly beneath calloused fingers. A flute carved from bone or wood sang in high, thin notes above the rumble of voices. A drum, steady and low, kept time, its beat echoing like the heartbeat of the hall. Songs rose, some slow and mournful, others loud and raucous, praising gods, heroes, or the pleasures of drink. The walls of the Longhouse shook with sound, alive with the voices of many as one. For the children, the feast was a wonder. Their bellies filled more than on ordinary days. Their eyes widened at the sight of abundance. They played between the benches, gnawed on bones, or fell asleep in warm corners as the songs and laughter carried on around them. Their memories of such nights would shape their sense of community, teaching them that joy was found not in solitude, but in togetherness. The presence of strangers added to the excitement. A guest from a distant settlement might share tales of foreign lands, of markets bustling with strange goods, of storms on the sea, or battles far from home. Their stories wove into the fabric of the feast, adding new colors to the tapestry of voices. The Longhouse, smoky and crowded though it was, became a world in miniature, where distant horizons mingled with the warmth of the hearth. But for all its joy, the feast could be overwhelming. The noise swelled until it seemed the hall itself might burst with it. The air grew thick with smoke, with the scent of roasting meat, with the sour tang of spilled ale. Bodies pressed close, laughter roared, songs thundered. For someone accustomed to quiet meals and wide tables, it would be too much, too loud, too close. And yet, this was the essence of fellowship. The feast was not simply about food. It was about bonds, between family, between neighbors, between gods and men. To feast together was to acknowledge dependence on one another, to honor the web of survival that stretched across every household. In the sharing of bread and ale, the Vikings reaffirmed the strength that bound them through hardship. Picture the scene, the fire blazing, shadows dancing across smoke-darkened beams, platters piled high, bowls clattering, horns raised. Laughter shakes the hall, music rises above it, voices weave together in song. Dogs bark, children giggle. A guest slams his hand against the table in approval. The hall trembles with life, filled with warmth and noise until the very air seems to glow. For the Vikings, such nights were rare and precious, moments of abundance in a world often marked by scarcity. For you, they might be overwhelming, the press of noise and bodies leaving you breathless. And yet, in this cacophony lies the truth of the Longhouse. It was not built for silence, but for fellowship. To live here was to share, to feast, to celebrate together, no matter how heavy the air, how crowded the benches, how loud the songs. The feast was the Longhouse at its brightest, a blaze of food, drink, and fellowship against the darkness outside. And when it ended, when the guests departed, and the hall returned to its steady rhythm of chores and smoke, its memory lingered. For the Vikings, these nights reminded them of their strength together. For you, it might remind you only of exhaustion, another reason why you would not last a single day within these walls. When the feast begins to settle, when bellies are full and the barrels of ale run low, the Longhouse shifts once more. The noise does not disappear. Laughter and murmurs still ripple across the benches, but a new rhythm takes hold. The fire burns brighter now, fed with extra logs, its flames leaping high, its smoke curling lazily into the rafters. Shadows dance across the beams, flickering shapes that seem almost alive. And into this glow steps the oldest, most enduring tradition of the Longhouse, the telling of stories. The sagas, the myths, the whispered tales of gods and heroes, these were the lifeblood of Viking evenings. Long before books and ink carried words across the world, stories lived only in voices, memory, and song. They were passed from mouth to ear, from one generation to the next, shaped and reshaped each time they were told. In the smoky longhouse, these stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons, warnings, and treasures of identity. Picture the scene. The benches crowded with people leaning close, bowls and horns set aside, the warmth of the fire drawing them inward. Children press against their mothers, their wide eyes fixed on the figure who rises to speak. Dogs curl quietly at their feet, the usual shuffle of the hall subdued. Even the animals seem to sense the shift, their noises fading into the background. The hall waits, suspended in smoky stillness, until the first words fall. The storyteller might be an elder, gray-haired and slow of step, but sharp of memory. Or perhaps a skald, a poet trained in the art of verse, whose words carried rhythm and power. Whoever it was, their voice cut through the air, rising and falling in cadence, weaving a world within the hall. The tales were many. Some spoke of the gods, Odin with his single eye, wandering in search of wisdom. Thor, strong and thunderous, his hammer Mjolnir flashing against giants. Loki, sly and dangerous, sowing chaos with clever tricks. These stories were not distant myths, but living truths. Each god's deeds explained the storms, the harvest, the turning of fate. When lightning cracked across the sky, it was Thor's hammer. When riddles confused the mind, it was Odin's cunning. In the Longhouse, these gods lived as close as neighbors, their presence felt in every story told. Other tales spoke of heroes, warriors who sailed across stormy seas, who faced dragons, who claimed treasures in distant lands. Their names lived in memory, each deed magnified with retelling. A child listening by the fire might dream of one day matching their courage, of standing in the sagas that would be told to the next generation. There were also stories of ancestors, of family lines traced back through centuries. These tales carried weight, for they reminded the household of who they were, where they came from, and what honor they must uphold. A grandfather's deeds, a grandmother's wisdom, an uncle's bravery, all were remembered, their voices echoing still through the words of the storyteller. The sagas were not only told, they were sung. The skald's voice rose in chant, verses structured in rhythm, alliteration carrying words like waves against the shore. The beat of a drum or the strum of a lyre might accompany the tale, the music weaving with the words until the hall itself seemed to hum with memory. Listeners swayed, their eyes half closed, their minds carried into the world of gods, giants, and heroes. For the Vikings, these stories were guides. They taught courage, loyalty, hospitality, and cunning. They warned against betrayal, greed, and arrogance. They explained the world's mysteries and gave meaning to suffering. A child might learn to respect fire not through command, but through a tale of Loki's mischief. A warrior might find strength in the memory of Thor's victories. A woman at the loom might endure her endless weaving by recalling the Norns, who wove the fates of gods and men alike. For you, sitting in the smoky hall, the experience might feel both enchanting and overwhelming. The firelight dazzles, the smoke stings your eyes. The voice of the storyteller rises and falls until it seems to carry you away. Yet the closeness of the hall presses in, the bodies crowding the benches, the children leaning against you, the dogs shifting at your feet. There is no solitude in this storytelling. No quiet reading in a chair by lamplight. The story is shared, collective, unavoidable. As the night deepens, the tales grow darker. Stories of Ragnarok, the end of the world, when gods and giants clash, when the sun and moon are swallowed, when the world sinks into the sea. The hall listens in silence, the fire crackling as if an echo of the destruction described. Children shiver, clutching their mothers, while men stare into the flames, imagining battles to come. The story carries fear, but also resilience, for even Ragnarok is not the end. From the ashes, new life will rise, and so hope endures. Sometimes the stories turn to laughter. Trickster tales of Loki, bumbling and clever, bring smiles even to weary faces. A jest shared in verse lightens the mood, the hall erupting in chuckles and shouts of approval. For a time, the smoke and closeness feel lighter, the air filled with mirth rather than weight. Storytelling by firelight was not only for feasts. It was the nightly rhythm of the Longhouse, the bridge between work and sleep. When tools were set aside, when weaving slowed, when animals quieted, voices carried stories into the dark. They lulled children toward dreams, soothed weary minds, and bound the household together in shared memory. Picture it one last time, the hall glowing red with firelight, shadows flickering across smoke-dark beams. The storyteller's voice steady and rich, words flowing like water. The listeners leaning close, their faces lit in gold and shadow, their breaths rising in quiet rhythm. The Longhouse itself seems to listen, its walls holding the stories, its beams absorbing the words that will be told again tomorrow. For the Vikings, this was life. For you, it might be too much, the smoke, the press of bodies, the endless voices. Yet even you might feel the tug of the stories, the pull of ancient words carried through the centuries. In the Longhouse, stories were not simply told. They were lived, binding the people to each other, to their gods, and to their past. And so the night deepens, the fire burns low, and the hall sinks slowly into rest. But the voices of the sagas linger, whispering still in the smoky air, carrying their weight into dreams. As the fire dwindles and the last stories fade into silence, the Longhouse turns toward rest. But rest in this place is not the gentle, private retreat you may know. It is crowded, noisy, and far from peaceful. Sleep here is a struggle, one more act of endurance in a life already filled with hardship. The benches that line the walls become beds. Furs are spread across wooden planks, cloaks pulled tight against the chill. Families lie close together, parents with children nestled against their sides, elders tucked carefully among them, servants and thralls finding space where they can. Privacy does not exist. The Longhouse is a single room, and sleep is a shared experience. The fire at the center of the hall burns low, its glow faint, its smoke lingering heavy in the air. A few coals are kept alive, banked carefully so the fire can be coaxed again at dawn. But the dimness leaves much of the hall in shadow, the corners dark, the beams above disappearing into blackness. Only the faintest flickers of light trace across the faces of those lying closest to the hearth. The air is thick, difficult to breathe. Smoke hangs low, pressing into lungs, stinging eyes even in sleep. Bodies add their warmth, dozens of breaths rising and falling together, thickening the already heavy atmosphere. The smell of sweat, wool, and animals lingers, layered with the day's cooking, the acrid tongue of smoke, and the earthy odors of livestock kept under the same roof. For someone not raised in such closeness, it is stifling. And then come the sounds. The hall does not fall silent when night comes. Instead, it shifts into a new kind of noise, the noises of sleep. Men snore loudly, their breath rattling, sometimes broken by sharp coughs. Children murmur and whimper in their dreams. Babies cry suddenly, their wails piercing the stillness, answered quickly by tired mothers. Dogs stir, claws scratching against the floor as they circle for a better place to lie. A goat shifts, its hooves clattering softly, its bleats startling in the darkness. The fire pops and hisses, logs collapsing into embers. The longhouse hums even in rest. The benches are crowded. You cannot stretch your limbs freely. Someone's elbow presses against your side. A child's foot kicks you in the night. The boards beneath the furs are hard. The straw underneath uneven, the warmth never quite enough. A draft slips through the gaps in the walls, sliding cold fingers across your skin. You shift, trying to find comfort, but there is little comfort to be found. In these conditions, sleep is not deep. It comes in fits and starts, broken by noise, by smoke, by the restlessness of bodies pressed together. A cough wakes you, a cry stirs you, the shifting of animals draws your eyes open again. Dreams blur with waking, the line between them thinned by exhaustion. When you do fall asleep, it is heavy and brief, broken soon by another interruption. Yet the Vikings endured it. They knew no other way. For them, this was home. The warmth of family gathered close, the fire's glow against the dark, the safety of many under one roof. They did not crave solitude, for solitude meant danger, cold, and vulnerability. To sleep among many was to sleep with protection, with community, with the assurance that no one faced the night alone. Still, the struggles were real. Illness spread quickly in such closeness. Lice and fleas thrived in bedding, crawling unseen until they itched at skin. Coughs rattled through the hall, passed from one sleeper to another. The smoke itself, never escaping fully, wore on lungs, making breathing shallow and sleep uneasy. The longhouse gave warmth and safety, but it exacted its cost. For children, sleep was often easier. Their bodies, small and weary from play, gave in more quickly, untroubled by the discomforts that kept adults awake. They curled beside mothers, their soft breaths steady, their dreams filled with sagas and games. Elders, by contrast, often lay awake longer, their joints aching, their lungs struggling, their minds turning over the stories of the day. The hall itself seemed alive in the night. The beams creaked in the wind, the thatch rustled as rain or snow struck it. The walls groaned as if bearing the weight of the world outside. Each sound reminded those within that the longhouse was both shelter and barrier, standing between them and the dangers of the dark, storms, wolves, raiders. Sleep came easier when one remembered that the hall was strong, that its walls and beams had endured many winters before. Still, for you, lying among them, the weight of it would be unbearable. The air too thick, the bodies too close, the noise too constant. You would long for a moment of silence, a breath of clean air, a bed of your own. You would toss and turn, eyes burning from smoke, patience wearing thin. By morning, you would not feel rested but worn, as though the struggle of sleeping here had drained you more than a day of labor. And yet, the Vikings rose each morning and began again. They accepted the discomfort, the restlessness, the crowded benches, because survival demanded it. The longhouse was not built for comfort, but for endurance. To sleep here was not to dream sweetly, but simply to endure until dawn. Picture it one last time. The fire's glow dim and fading, the hall crowded with bodies wrapped in furs, the air heavy with smoke and breath. A man snores beside you, a child murmurs in sleep, a dog shifts at your feet. The longhouse hums with its nocturnal chorus, never silent, never still. You close your eyes, but the struggle of sleep weighs on you, pressing as heavily as the smoke above. For the Vikings, this was ordinary. For you, it is one more reminder. The longhouse, smoky, crowded, and restless, is no place for easy dreams. To last even one night within its walls would be a trial, and to endure it day after day, year after year, was a feat that only those born into this world could achieve. Even with the fire glowing in the hearth and dozens of bodies sharing warmth under one roof, the longhouse could never fully keep out the cold. The north pressed in constantly, seeping through cracks in the walls, slipping beneath doors, sinking down from the rafters. It was a presence as steady as the smoke, a reminder that beyond the wooden beams and turf walls lay a world of frost and biting wind. At first, the cold revealed itself as a draft, a faint breath against the skin, a whisper of chill sliding across the floor. Those nearest the fire felt it only as a shadow, a coolness that brushed their backs even as their faces glowed with heat. But for those lying farther from the hearth, pressed against the outer walls, the cold was no whisper. It was a constant ache, a biting chill that stiffened fingers and toes, that crept into joints and slowed the body's strength. The walls of the longhouse were thick, built of timber and insulated with turf, moss, or clay. They were strong, but they were not perfect. Winter winds found their way through every gap, carrying with them the sting of frost. The roof, layered with thatch or turf, sagged beneath heavy snow, sometimes dripping meltwater onto the floor as the fire's warmth battled the weight of ice above. At night, the cold settled like an invisible guest, moving through the hall as steadily as smoke, lingering in every corner. Blankets of wool and furs offered protection, but they were never enough. Families huddled close, wrapping themselves in layers, children pressed against their parents, elders tucked between younger bodies for warmth. The benches groaned under the weight of so many, but still the cold seeped in, chilling noses, numbing feet, turning each breath into a frosty cloud that mingled with the smoky air. Animals, too, played their part in keeping the hall warm. Cows, goats, and sheep radiated heat, their bodies heavy and steaming in the darkness. Their breath mingled with human breath, thickening the air, warming it slightly. Yet even this could not banish the chill entirely. Instead, it created a strange balance, a hall both stifling with smoke and odor and still too cold for comfort. The fire was tended constantly. Even in the night, someone stirred the embers, feeding them with logs or branches. The crackle of burning wood was reassurance that warmth remained, that the hall would not freeze entirely. But firewood was precious, gathered at great effort, and could not be wasted. The fire was allowed to sink low at times, its heat weakening, its glow dimming, until the cold pressed closer again. To the Vikings, the cold was an old companion. They were born into it, hardened by it, shaped by winters that tested endurance as much as strength. They accepted its presence inside the longhouse as natural, unavoidable. They knew how to layer wool, how to wrap cloaks, how to sleep pressed close to others. They endured. For you, though, the cold would be merciless. Each draft would feel like a knife against your skin, each icy breath a discomfort you could not escape. You would shiver even under furs, your muscles tightening, your patience thinning as the night dragged on. The smoke might sting your lungs, but without it, the fire would falter, and the hall would plunge deeper into frost. There is no balance here that would bring you peace, only the constant struggle between heat and cold, both pressing upon you at once. The cold crept into daily life, too. In the mornings, frost sometimes rimmed the benches, thin crystals glittering faintly in the firelight. Water left in buckets froze at the edges, needing to be broken before it could be used. Fingers numbed quickly when working with tools, forcing pauses to warm them by the fire. Even indoors, breath fogged the air, mingling with smoke in a haze that never fully cleared. Children bore it with resilience. They played in the chill, their laughter rising even as their noses reddened and their hands stiffened. They learned early to ignore discomfort, to find warmth in motion, in closeness, in laughter. Elders, though, suffered more. Their bones ached in the cold, their joints stiffened, their sleep broken by shivers. Yet they, too, endured, wrapped in wool and memory, their presence a testament to survival. The cold shaped more than bodies. It shaped minds. It reminded the household daily of the fragility of life, of the constant struggle to endure the North. It taught them to value firewood, to treasure wool, to store food carefully, to work together for survival. It taught patience and resilience, forging a strength that could not be learned in warmth. Picture the longhouse on a winter's night. The fire glows low, shadows long against the beams. Families huddled together beneath furs, their bodies pressed close, their breath clouding the air. Beyond the walls, the wind howls, rattling the turf, pressing cold fingers through every crack. Inside, the cold lingers still, slipping across the floor, settling into bones. The hall is warm compared to the world outside, yet it is never warm enough. For the Vikings, this was life. For you, it would be torment. To endure the smoke and the noise was already difficult, but to add the creeping cold, the draughts that no cloak can banish, the shivers that wake you from shallow sleep, it would be too much. You would rise in the morning not refreshed, but exhausted, your body stiff, your patience worn thin. And yet, the household would rise and begin again. They accepted the cold as constant, as inevitable. They did not curse it, but lived with it, endured it, and in doing so, became strong enough to survive in lands where many would falter. The cold, unwelcome though it was, bound them together, teaching them that warmth was not found in solitude, but in the shared breath and closeness of the longhouse. The longhouse, crowded and smoky as it was, stood not only as a home, but as a barrier between its people and the world beyond. For inside, there was warmth, food, and the comfort of many gathered together. Outside, however, lurked dangers that were constant, unpredictable, and sometimes deadly. To live in a Viking longhouse was to understand that the walls were not only shelter, but defense, fragile protection against a hostile world. The North was a land of beauty, but also of risk. The forests stretched wide and dark, filled with creatures that could be both useful and threatening. Wolves prowled at the edges of settlements, their howls echoing through the night, chilling the blood of those who heard them. Hungry in the long winters, they crept close, bold enough at times to snatch livestock or even threaten people who wandered too far alone. Bears, too, roamed the woods, powerful and unpredictable. Their size and strength are a reminder that humans were not the only hunters in this land. The seas and rivers, lifelines of trade and travel, carried dangers of their own. Storms rose suddenly, waves crashing, winds tearing sails to shreds. A family might watch from the doorway as a storm lashed the fjord, praying for the safety of fathers, brothers, or sons who had taken ships across its waters. The sea gave life, but it demanded respect, and sometimes it demanded lives. Then there were other people. The Viking world was not a quiet one of isolated farms and peaceful neighbors. Raids, feuds, and rivalries marked the land. A longhouse that seemed calm tonight could be attacked tomorrow, its stores plundered, its walls set alight, its people forced to defend themselves. Weapons on the walls were not decorations, but necessities. The presence of warriors in the hall was reassurance, but it was also a reminder that danger could arrive at any time. At night, these dangers pressed close. The wind rattled the door, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves or the eerie silence of a world too still. Families huddled nearer the fire, their conversations hushed, their ears alert for sounds outside. A dog's bark might send hearts racing, for it could mean an intruder, animal or human, testing the strength of the hall. The dangers outside shaped the very design of the longhouse. Its walls were thick, its doorway narrow, its hearth central. It was built not for luxury, but for endurance. At night, when the world outside seemed most threatening, the hall's crowded, smoky interior felt less like a burden and more like a fortress. The closeness of family, the constant crackle of the fire, the watchfulness of dogs, these were layers of defense fragile but vital. Children grew up with these dangers woven into their lives. They were warned never to wander far alone, taught to respect the forest and the sea, told stories of wolves, trolls, and raiders that blurred the line between myth and truth. Fear was part of their education, but so was courage. To survive here was to acknowledge danger and face it without flinching. For you, the dangers would be overwhelming. The thought of wolves circling in the night, of storms tearing through the fjords, of raiders appearing at the door, all of it would weigh on you, even as you tried to sleep within the smoky hall. The longhouse might feel crowded and oppressive, but stepping outside would feel worse, a plunge into a world where every shadow held threat. Yet for the Vikings, these dangers were familiar. They did not live in constant panic, but in constant readiness. They knew how to guard their flocks, how to watch the horizon for ships, how to read the sky for storms. They accepted the risks as part of life, as natural as the turning of the seasons. The longhouse gave them a base from which to endure, to fight, to return each night knowing that danger remained outside, at least for now. Picture it, the fire glowing low, the hall filled with sleeping families, animals shifting softly in the shadows. Beyond the walls, the wind moans, carrying with it the cry of a wolf. A dog growls softly by the door, ears pricked, body tense. The household stirs uneasily, reassured only by the thickness of the walls, the weapons near at hand, the knowledge that together they are stronger than any danger outside. For the Vikings, the dangers outside were simply part of the world. For you, they would be unbearable. To last even one night in the longhouse would mean not only enduring the smoke, the noise, the cold, and the crowded sleep, but also the constant awareness that outside, beyond the turf and timber walls, the world waited with teeth, claws, storms, and blades. The longhouse was not merely a home. It was a fortress of survival, a fragile but vital shield against a world always ready to test its strength. Night inside the longhouse is not quiet, and it is not empty. When the last logs settle and the glow of the hearth slips to embers, another kind of life begins, the life of dreams. In this smoky hall, where breath hangs in the air and bodies lie close in tangled furs, the mind loosens its grip on the waking world and drifts toward places shaped by story and fear, by memory and faith. Here, dreams are not private toys of the imagination. They are signs, visitations, warnings, currents that carry the sleeper into the company of gods and ancestors. You turn on the hard bench, tugging your cloak against a draft that creeps like a cold hand along the floor. Somewhere a child whimpers and quiets. A dog lifts its head and lets it drop again with a soft sigh. Above, beams dark with soot seem to stretch out like the ribs of a great beast. And in that cramped, smoky dark, the mind opens. The Vikings spoke of Drom, dreams with weight and meaning. They did not dismiss the night's visions as idle nonsense. They pressed them for truth. Stories told by firelight are not simply entertainment. They prime the night. A tale of Thor's thunder may return as a storm rolling low across the sky of sleep. A saga of a ship cutting through gray water may rouse the heartbeat, set an oar's rhythm in the chest. Even a simple household worry, a thinning barrel of grain, a cow that will not fatten, can swell in the dark until it fills the hall like weather. Some say Odin sends dreams, the one-eyed god wandering between worlds with knowledge hidden under his hood. If a figure steps from mist in your sleep and speaks with calm authority, who is to say it is not him, or one of his messengers, hinting at the twist of fate to come? Others murmur of Valkyries, bright and terrible, choosing the slain, leaning over a warrior's bed with eyes like cold stars. Wake from such a dream and the taste of iron may remain on the tongue, though your hands clutch only fur and wool. There are gentler visitations, too. The Filja, the follower, a spirit double that may appear as a person or an animal, comes in dreams as a guide or a warning, a mirror of fate. To dream of your kin walking beside a fox or a bear might unsettle the belly in the morning. For such shapes can portend cunning or strength, luck or danger. What does it mean? The question goes into the stew with the barley, into the thread with the spindle, into the day's work, considered, never fully solved. The smoke itself seems to tilt the scale toward visions. Air is thick here. The breath comes shallow, and minds hover at that edge between waking and sleep. In that fog, images sharpen strangely. A prow cutting black water under a pale moon, a door iron cold against the palm, the sudden shock of gulls turning like scraps of torn cloth in a hard wind. A warrior sleeping near his spear dreams of battle, not by choice perhaps, but as if the iron hums through the marrow. He starts, gripping the haft, eyes open to the dark, unsure whether the shout that woke him came from the hall or from his own blood. Elsewhere on the benches, old women drift into deeper tides. Their dreams wander further, not to the splash of oars, but to the Norns beneath the roots of the great ash, the weavers of fate, drawing bright threads through the fingers and knotting them beyond human sight. A woman who spends daylight at the loom can easily imagine this. The universe itself is cloth, patterns appearing and vanishing, threads tensing at the slightest pull. She wakes with the taste of cold spring water on her tongue, though she has not lifted her head to drink, and she tells no one. Not every dream is for sharing. When a household is lucky, the night is filled with simple pictures. A field bright with buttercups, a fat calf in spring, a child laughing without cough or fever. But often the Longhouse dreams rougher. Wolves prowl the margins of sleep as they prowl the edge of the farmstead. The sea rolls through the mind with more force than any hearth-fire warmth can counter. A man might dream of high, green-black waves like walls, and wake panting, as if he has swallowed brine in the safety of his own bed. A mother may dream of footsteps on the threshold when none have come, and in the morning she ties a length of wool about a child's wrist, not too tight, for luck. Ritual seeps into these night waters. A woman tied to the old arts may set an amulet by her head, a small Gilelnir hammered from bronze, a sprig of herb in a cloth twist, and whisper a few words learned from her mother and her mother before. Outside the village, a Volva, a seeress, might chant over coals and read the shape of smoke or the sway of a staff, calling insight into the mind like a bird to the fist. Not every household seeks such help, but most know someone who does, and in the telling, dreams grow teeth and wings, becoming part of the web that holds meaning together. Children, lank with sleep, thrash and sigh. Their dreams are quicksilver. One laughs outright, startling the dog, and another jerks with a cry that vanishes as soon as it arrives. What visions dance in their heads? Faces from the feast, a skald's hands cutting shapes in the air, a neighbor as red cloak, mingle with bigger figures, Thor with a hammer too large for any bench. A ship whose sail is a patchwork of all the woven cloth the child has ever seen. By dawn, they remember none of it, but the day has already been colored by the night's palette. Sometimes the hall wakes together. A sudden wind slams the door hanging, and the dog explodes in a bark. A dozen sleepers snatch at the same breath, tumbling out of different dreams into the same moment. For a heartbeat, the Longhouse is one creature, many hearts beating, many minds snapping from water to air. Then it fragments again. Someone murmurs, "Only wind," and the dark closes gently around the embers. The dreams return, as wolves return to a tree line, patient, inevitable. There are bad dreams that stick. A bent figure standing at the foot of the bench. A ship returning with fewer shadows aboard it than left. A field under frost in midsummer. Such images leave taste and weight behind, a heaviness even the morning porridge cannot lift. These are not kept private. Over bowls and bread, they are offered to the table, told briefly, almost roughly, like something throbbing that must be pressed. The elder listens, squints through smoke, and tells a story in reply, not to erase the dream, but to frame it, to place it among other nights and other fears. It helps. Fear shrinks a little when it has a story to live in. Not all warriors are berserkers, and not all dreams are battles, but those who have seen blood remember it differently in the dark. Some wake with fists clenched, nails bitten into their own palms. Others lie still, eyes open, letting the breath even out until the longhouse comes back into shape. Rafters, benches, furs, familiar snores. The spear against the wall is only a spear again. The scar on the forearm is only a line. Sleep will return, or it won't. Morning comes either way. Dreams angle toward omens, toward portents, because the day is uncertain. A hall holds food. Yes, but winter gnaws at the door. A child coughs. A way near lambing lies too quiet. A ship is due. In such a world, the mind is hungry for pattern, for any hint that tomorrow leans this way and not that. So a raven in a dream is not just a raven. It might be one of Odin's, Hugin, or Munin, thought and memory, circling where the eye cannot reach. A bright fish breaking water might mean news will come, or luck will turn, or the net will be light. The meaning is debated with a seriousness that modern ears might reserve for laws or ledgers. And yet, amid fate and foreboding, there is simple comfort. Sleep, even patchy, knits the day's raveled edges. The mind walks a quiet shore between embers and dawn, gathering bits of light. You drift and rise, carried on the small sound of someone's breathing. A hand finds yours in the dark, a child's, perhaps, or kin drowsing beside you, and the world steadies. In the last hour before dawn, the dreams thin. Cold settles on any skin left uncovered. The longhouse shivers as if it too is a body. Someone stirs to coax the embers. A dull glow returns to the hearthstone, and shadows retreat by finger widths. Dreams break like ice in a pail under a quick heel. Whispers start, a name, a short laugh, the scrape of a bowl, and with them returns the weight of day. What remains of the night's journeys? A word that clings to the tongue, the afterimage of a wave cresting gold, the certainty, absurd and unshakable, that a guest will arrive by sundown, perhaps nothing at all. But even when forgotten, the dreams have done their work. They have braided story and fear and hope into the fabric of the household, stitched another row into the long cloth that runs from yesterday to today to tomorrow. You rise with the others, shoulders tight from the hard bench, hair full of the scent of smoke. Outside, the world waits, wolves or wind, luck or lack. Inside, the memory of the night's company lingers. Gods at the edge of vision, ancestors closer than breath, battle somewhere beyond the door, but not yet at it. The longhouse shakes itself awake, and whatever the dreams were, they go with everyone into the day. The longhouse breathes with the weight of night. Smoke drifts in pale ribbons, the fire no more than a nest of glowing embers. The hall thick with the smell of wool, ash, and sleeping bodies. Then, slowly, the day begins again. It begins not with silence, but with stirring, the creak of benches as someone shifts, the muffled cough of a child, the faint rustle of furs being pulled tighter against the cold. Dawn comes slowly in the north. The first light that seeps through cracks in the turf walls, and the smoke hole above is gray, dim, hardly brighter than the fire. Still, it is enough to rouse the hall. The mistress of the house rises first, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, feet bare against the packed earth floor. She moves quietly toward the hearth, crouching low, blowing gently on the embers until sparks flicker and flames spring back to life. The fire crackles awake, casting shadows across the beams, warming the smoky air. This is the signal. The longhouse stirs fully now. Children rub sleep from their eyes, their hair tousled, their cheeks still pink from the cold. Men rise, stretching stiff limbs, pulling on woolen tunics and boots stiff with frost. Dogs shake themselves, claws clicking softly against the floor as they nose about for scraps. Chickens flutter and cluck in their corners, already restless. A goat bleats sharply, its voice cutting through the quiet. A routine begins again. Buckets are gathered for water, the first chores assigned. One child is sent to fetch wood, another to sweep the floor clear of straw and ash. Women set pots back onto the hearth, preparing porridge for the morning meal. Men check the weapons leaning against the beams, test the sharpness of their blades, speak quietly about tasks that must be done before night falls again. The longhouse comes alive quickly. The rhythm of the day is familiar, each person moving in well-worn patterns. Yesterday's labors repeat themselves today, and will repeat again tomorrow. Spinning, weaving, carving, milking, mending, grinding grain, cooking meals. The cycle does not break. It endures, steady as the turning of seasons. For the Vikings, this endless repetition was not dull. It was life. Each day survived was a triumph against cold, hunger, and danger. Each morning firelit was another chance to endure, to raise children, to tend animals, to weave stories into the smoky air of the hall. The longhouse did not change much from day to day, but it did not need to. Its purpose was not novelty, but survival. Yet for you, standing in this hall after a single day and night, the cycle feels crushing. The smoke, the closeness, the noise, the cold, all of it returns again with the dawn, offering no relief, no escape. You would long for fresh air, for silence, for space to call your own. You would feel weariness before the day had even begun. And still, the Vikings rose day after day. They faced the same smoke, the same cold drafts, the same crowded benches, and they endured. Their strength was not only in their swords or their ships, but in their patience, in their ability to live this rhythm without breaking beneath it. The longhouse was not merely shelter. It was the heart of a way of life that demanded resilience in every breath. Picture it one last time. The fire brightening, bowls of steaming porridge passed hand to hand, children laughing despite the smoke in their eyes. Outside, the wind moans faintly across the land, carrying with it the threat of hunger, of wolves, of raiders. Inside, the longhouse glows with warmth and noise, alive once more. The cycle has resumed. What was endured yesterday will be endured again today, and again tomorrow, until the seasons turn. For the Vikings, this was survival. For you, it would be too much. The longhouse allows no pause, no solitude, no comfort. It demands everything: your patience, your strength, your endurance. To last a single day within its smoky walls is already a test. To live here, year after year, was a life only the strong, the communal, and the enduring could manage. And so we leave the Viking Longhouse, its smoky beams fading behind us, its crowded benches quieting into memory. You have walked through its morning, its labors, its feasts, its restless night. You have felt the smoke sting your eyes, the cold creep through the walls, the noise fill every corner, the press of animals and children and warriors living together under one roof. It is easy to see, now, why you might not last a day here. The discomforts press hard, the demands never cease, and the closeness leaves little room to breathe. And yet, for the Vikings, this was not burden but life, endured with patience, shaped with skill, bound together by family, by story, by faith. As you drift toward your own rest tonight, let the hum of their world carry you. The crackle of the hearth, the murmur of voices, the rhythm of weaving and carving and storytelling. All of it part of the cycle that turned endlessly, a cycle that kept them alive through long winters and fleeting summers. Thank you for spending this time here, for listening, for letting these stories keep you company as you close your eyes. If you enjoyed this journey, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can return for more history told in gentle tones, perfect for rest. And I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what parts of history you'd like me to explore next, and when you listen in. Do you let these stories soothe you at night, or do you find comfort in them during the day? Your thoughts, your presence, your curiosity, they keep this longhouse of voices alive. Until next time, may your dreams be calm, and may sleep come easily.